As Hashem, today's daf is Masechta Kiddushin Daf Lamed Vav. We're going to start from the bottom of Daf Lamed Hey Amud Beis. Let's just make it bigger. Okay, here we are. We're going to start from where the lines get wider, and second wide line Isi Tani. Basically, what we're discussing over here is that the women, Isha, a woman has every mitzvah loisa say applies to a woman. She's not allowed to eat, she's not allowed to have shatnez or kosher. She has to eat kosher. The Mishnah says that there are a few things that loisa say that don't apply by a woman, and you can imagine. One is putting a razor blade to the beard. That doesn't apply to the woman, and also cutting the payas off does not apply to a woman. So Isi is going to say, Isi is the name of a Tana, and he's going to add something to the Mishnah. There's another lav in the Torah that has nothing to do with that. It doesn't apply by women. So I'm just going to bring up the pasuk on the screen over here. The pasuk says in Devarim, Bonim atem lashem alekechem, and save the Devarim. You are sons to the Eibishter. That's what the pasuk starts off. Loisis gaididu. You're not allowed to give yourself a tattoo. V'loisosimu karcha bein einechem, and basically you're not allowed to make a bald spot right where you put your tefillin on, which is directly above between your eyes, actually where the brain with both eyes meet the brain, as far as where that spot on the head. So you're not allowed to pull your hair out lemeis if somebody died. So basically it's saying, I guess they didn't the Canaanim didn't believe in Tchias HaMesim, and we believe in Tchias HaMesim, so we don't have to have a tattoo, and we don't get so crazy by ripping our hair out when somebody dies. That's what Hashem says. Banamatim, you are my sons. Ki am kodesh atal Hashem echelkecha. You are a holy people. You are a treasured people on all the nations on the face of the earth. So that's the mitzvah of not pulling your hair out. Also, by the way, I'm going to point out to you, it comes up in the Gemara. The pasuk says by the Kahanim, right? A bunch of laws when you're a Kohen. It says they're not allowed to touch a mace, right? They're not allowed to touch a dead body. And then the Torah tells us by a Kohen, the Torah repeats it. It says, Lo yikruchu karcha b'roshim. They're also not allowed to make a bald spot. And then the Torah says, Uvisoram lo yisrutu surates. And in their flesh, they're not allowed to make a tattoo. Now notice that the pasuk uses a different word for tattoo by a Kohen. It says surates. But the regular pasuk by every Jew, it says lois is gaididu. Don't make a tattoo. Okay, now that you have this background, we can understand the Gemara. Isi Tani, Isi gave us another lav that does not apply to a woman. Af bal yikachu, pulling your hair out when somebody passes away does not apply to a woman. Nashim paturis, nashim are not obligated in this lav. Why? My time of the Isi. What's the reason of Isi? The Darashachi, because he had a drush like this. The pasuk says, "Bonam atam l'Hashem lekechem loisus gaididu, loisus sigimu karcha ben enechem lemes." You are sons to the Eibishter, and therefore don't make a tattoo and don't pull your hair out. Ki am kodesh atam l'Hashem lekechem. So we darshim bonim. You are sons. Why does the Torah introduce that lav with your sons? V'loi bonus lekarcha. It's teaching you that the lav of pulling your hair out applies to a son. It applies to the men, but does not apply to the woman. Says the Gemara, maybe what the Gemara seems to say is that making a tattoo applies to a woman as well. So the Gemara asks this question, you say the word bonim is referring to pulling your hair out of karcha. Maybe the Torah is telling you that only men, boys, and not girls, which means only men and not women, is only by the isser of making a tattoo. How do you know the pasuk is teaching you that statement applies to loisasimu karcha? So the Gemara says, Kishu oimer ki am kodesh atul Hashem lekecha. The Torah wrote that you're a nation, that these lavim apply to the nation. Hare gedida amar. So that what the Torah just told you is that making a tattoo applies to a woman as well as a man. So when does the Torah say a limiting factor that this lav only applies to a man and not to a woman? L'karcha, when it comes to pulling the hair out. So the Gemara asks, the Torah tells you in the pasuk two statements. One, bonim, that it applies to a man, not to a boy and a man, and not to a woman. And the Torah says ki'am, that these lavim apply to both men and women. So the question is, Mara Isa l'rabbis es hagdida. What made you say that when it comes to the lav of making a tattoo, it applies to both men and women? Ulahoitzi es karcha, and exclude the lav of making yourself making a bald spot. I mean, pulling out your hair. That only applies to men and not women. What made you say that? I mean, you have two things on the table. You could pick and choose. And says the Gemara, Meraba ani es hagdida. I'd rather put not making a tattoo to include women, sheyeshna bimkoim haseir v'shloi bimkoim haseir, because it's an unlimiting type of lav. You're not allowed to put a tattoo on the part of your body that has hair, and even on the parts of your body that do not have hair. It doesn't matter. You can't put it. You can't put a tattoo on the palm of your hand. So it's not a limiting lav. So therefore, it's not limiting to any person who's part of Klal Yisrael, man or woman, a chayev in this lav of gedida. Or might say ani is a karcha, but I will exclude pulling your hair out, the lav of loisikru karcha, since it's limiting already. She'ena elabim komser. This din only applies on the head. You're not allowed to pull your hair out. So it's already limiting. So therefore, it's limiting into, we'll say it's limited for only men and not women. So the Gemara says like this, Ve'ema, so let us say like this. So the pasuk says, Bonim atem Lashem, and then the Torah means it applies to men and women. And then the pasuk says, Ki'am, that applies to everyone. So you said to me that Loisis Gaidu applies to everyone, and Bonim means that you're now it only applies to men when it comes to Karcha. So the Gemara's question is, Ve'ema, Bonim v'lai Bonis, that makes perfect sense. That the word bonim is excluding women, and it applies whether you're pulling your hair out, the karcha lav, or the gedida lav. The gedida lav. Gedida lav is the lav of making a tattoo with an instrument, with a professional way. And we'll say that only applies to men and women. So then, what is Am Kodesh? V'chi kasav Am Kodesh atul Hashem alekecha. The all-inclusive part of the pasuk that says applies to men and women, besrita hidiksiv. Maybe it applies by the other lav, where the Torah repeats this lav of not making a tattoo, and there the Torah uses the word sarita, which sarita means even you do it by hand. You don't use a pen or something like that. You do it by hand. So maybe that part of the lav is much more strict. It applies to men and women, and the bonim is limiting. Since bonim is limiting by both karcha and gedida. So how do you square that off? So the Gemara says, Kisaber isi held, srita ugedida. We go to the top of the page, achasi. Srita and gedida is one thing, alav. Once you include everybody in srita, in the gedida, it's included in srita, and vice versa. So where we're holding right now is, if I were to ask you, how did EC know that layikruku karcha b'roshim, you're not allowed to pull your hair out for a mace, only applies by men and not by women? So because the pasuk says bonim atem lashem lekechem, the pasuk says it implies by boys, by sons, but not by daughters. So therefore, that's how EC learned, according to the first pshat, how it only applies by men and not by women. Abaye gives you another reason why EC said his opinion, because Hainu Tama the EC. This is the reason why EC said that the karcha lav does not apply by a woman. The gama karcha bebnei aharon. He learns Gzeira Shava from loisimu karcha b'rosham, right? Here the pasuk says loisimu karcha b'nei nechem lameis, right? That's the pasuk by regular yid, and it also says the word. Here it says Emor El Kahana Bnei Aharon, and it says Lo Yikruku Karcha B'Roshim. So we're gonna have a Gzeira Shava. You learn it out from Bnei Aharon. Ma'alaha learn just like over there. By a kohen, we say beferish. There it says Noshim Peturas. There we know for a fact that Noshim are exempt from Karcha by the pasuk that it repeats that lav by Emor in Parshas Emor, there the Torah says all these things that I'm telling you only apply by the boys. It does not apply by the girls because it says Emor lekahanim b'nei Aharon. So if by a kohen it only applied by the men and not the woman, Afkan, so also the pulling out of the hair that the Torah says by a regular Yid, Nashim Paturis will also say that Nashim is Potter. So it's a Gzeir Shava, Karcha, from Bnei Aharon. Says the Gemara, now the Gemara asks the question, the Gemara is puzzled. Why do I need, if the Torah told you that by a kohen, it only applies by a woman, it only applies by a man, not by a woman, I don't even need a Gzeir Shava. The key kasiv if you're trying to tell me that the whole Parshas Emor, where the Torah gives you a bunch of halachos that apply by a kohen, only apply by the men and not by the ladies, so why do I need a Gezer Shava? Once I know that karcha only applies by a man kohen and not by a woman kohen, nishta kramine, let the Torah not say the Gezer Shava karcha, the taste of a kal v'choyma, and I'll learn it out from a kal v'choyma. I will say like this: Uma kahanim, just like kahanim, sheriba behen akosas mitzvahs yiseres. The kohen has many different mitzvahs, right? He has a bunch of dinim. He can't go to a cemetery. He does avoid. So there's many mitzvahs, right? But the pasuk says when it comes to pulling the hair out, b'nei Aharon, v'loy b'nei Aharon, applies by the boys, not by the men. So certainly Yisrael like Kolshkein. So by a regular Yid, the Isra of Simu Karka should apply by a man and not by a lady. So why do I need this Gezer Shava? So the Gemara says, Ilav Gezer Shava. If I didn't have the Gezer Shava, Havamina, I would have thought Hifsika Inyan. I would have thought like this, that really the Torah says B'nei Aharon right over here. It says everything applies by B'nei Aharon. But the Torah says Lo Yatama. The Torah also includes in the middle of the parsha of talking about a kohen. The Torah says that you have to sit avelas for the 7 relatives, and that applies by a man and a woman. So now that part applies by both men and women. So I would say once already, now we're switching over to halachas that apply by both men and women. So I would think Lo Yikru Karcha B'Rosham applies both by a male kohen and a female kohen, and that's why I need the Gezer Shava. So that's what the Gemara says. That the Torah interrupted itself, talking about both the things that apply by both man and woman. So therefore, that's why I need the Gezer Shava. Says the Gemara, not true. Let's just say that by a kohen, let's say it now. Let's say that it applies by both men kohen and women kohen. Now the Gemara wants to say that Yisimu Karcha B'Rosham by the Parshas Emor applies by both a male kohen and a female kohen. Then what do you need the Gezer Shava? What's the Gezer Shava? It teaches you other things. Yimishim Gezer Shava, I needed to teach you other things regarding that. The Tanya we learned in the Brisa, Lo Yikru Karcha. Torah says that you're not allowed to, a kohen is not allowed to pull out the hair. So the Brisa says Yochel afil koreach arba v'chomish karchas lo yechayev elachas. Let's say you took your 5 fingers and you put some glue on them and you pulled your hair out in 5 different places at one time with one hasra. I would have thought you only chayev one lav. Talmud loimet karcha lechayev kol achas achas, that you chayev on every single lav for all 5 fingers. And then the Torah wrote B'Rosham, don't pull out your hair in your head. Ma Talmud loimer. Why did the Torah write B'Rosham? Because by a regular Yisrael, it says here the Torah was more specific and said that the pulling out of a hair only applies to the front of the head where you put your tefillin on. Only in the hair between your eyes. How do you know that it includes in the entire head? It doesn't matter which part of the head, it's all the same. The front of the head or any part of the head where you pull your hair out, that's asur. So that's halachas that we learn when the Torah repeated this law by a kohen. You learn extra things. You learn that you chayev on each hair, and you also learn that it applies to the entire head. The Eilen, the kohen should be have kosam mitzvahs. Maybe this halacha of giving extra lavim and that it applies to the rest of the head only applies by a kohen. because the Kohen anyway has extra mitzvahs. Yisrael Minolan. How do you know that this applies by Yisrael as well? So the Gemara says, Nemakan Karcha. It says by the Kohen Karcha. But we're over here by the Kohen Karcha. V'nema Lahalan Karcha. And it says by Yisrael Karcha. Makan. Just like by the Kohen, Chayav Kol Karcha v'Karcha v'Chayav Kol Roish K'Bei Denayim. Just like by the Kohen, you Chayav on every hair, and it applies to the entire head. Af Lahalan Chayav Kol Karcha v'Karcha v'Chayav Kol Roish K'Bei Denayim. So also when by a regular Jew, every hair that he pulls out, it is a lav, and also it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be in between the eyes. It could be anywhere on the head. And we go like this. And then we go, so Yisrael was learning things from a Kohen. Now the Kohen is going to learn things from Yisrael. Just by the Yisrael, it says, don't pull your head out because somebody died. Afkan, also by a Kohen, it refers to Alames. He only chayiv if he pulled it out because somebody died. So the question that the Gemara is right now holding, if so, let us say that the Isra of La Yisimu Karcha Bein Einechem by a Kohen, by the Parsha of Emor, applies by both male Kohens and female Kohens. There's a Gzera Shava. The Gzera Shava will teach you other things, other halachas that the halachas that apply by a Kohen also apply by Yisrael. So how do you know that it's teaching you two concepts? So the Gemara says, "In Kain nichtav k'mona kra kerach." My karcha. Why did the Torah write karcha? Shamet minei tarte. So you see two ideas from it. Number one idea is you see that the halachas that it says by a kohen that that he's chayiv, even no matter how many hairs he pulls out, he's chayiv at each one, and also he's chayiv on the entire head. So that also applies by Yisrael. But you also, the Torah could have wrote kerach, and it wrote an extra hay to teach you that this isra pulling hair out only applies by a female kohen, it applies by a male kohen, not a female kohen. And that is the same thing by Yisrael. When the Torah says don't pull your hair out, it applies by males, but not by females. So that is the source of Isi according to Abaya. Gzeir Shava Karcha Karcha. Now the Gemara says, Rav Avim says, Haidu Tamid Isi. I'll give you another reason what Isi says. The Yolaf Bein Einechem Etfilim. The Torah says, Lo Yesimu Karcha Bein Einechem. Don't pull your hair out where you put your tefillin on. So, there's a Gzeira Shava to tefillin. Ma'alahal and Nashim Peturas, just like tefillin, Nashim are potter on tefillin, because it's learned from Talmud Torah. If Nashim is potter on Talmud Torah, they're exempt from tefillin. Afkan, Nashim Peturas. So also, L'yikuku Karcha is an Isser, is only applies to males and not females. So the Gemara Rama my Tama La'omak Abaya. Why didn't Rava like Abaya's Gzeira Shava? He doesn't learn that from the extra hay you could learn an extra limud. Sometimes the Torah writes extra hay for no reason. So therefore Rava didn't like Abaya's understanding of Isi. Why didn't Abaya learn like Rava? That the Gzeir Shava Bein Einechem to Tefillin. Amalach, he will tell you, Tefillin Gufayim HaChagam Allah. Really, I will tell you that it's best to say, and that's a very odd thing to say, that both men and women are chayev if they pull their hair out. So what do I need a Gzeir Shava Bein Einechem to Tefillin? Because how do you actually know that the Tefillin has to be by the head? When you read the pasuk in Tefillin, it seems to say that you put the Tefillin on top of your nose. But since the Torah uses the same language, don't pull your hair out, between your eyes, so it implies that when the Torah writes bein einechem, it really means the top of your head. So therefore, because that's where you can pull your hair out. And from there, you learn that tefillin has to be not put on top of your nose because there's no hair there. You have to put it on top of your head. So since I have that Gzeira Shava already, bein einechem, to teach you where you put the tefillin on, I'd rather say, according to Abaya, if it wasn't for the Gzeira Karcha, I would say that that this Isra of Karcha applies by both male and female. So that's why Abaya had the other Gzeira Shava of Karcha to teach you it applies by, just like it applies by male Kahanim, not female Kahanim, so also it applies by male Yisrael and not by female Yisrael. Now the Gemara concludes, Obein Abaya, Obein Rabava. But according to Abaye and both the Rava, they have other sources to know that Loyisimu Karcha does not apply by a female. It only applies by a male. So then why did the Torah write, Hay Bonim Atem Maidarshabe? What did they write with the Bonim Atem Lashem Lekechem? What did they darshan with that? That this is your sons. What did the Torah mean by that? Hi miboyle leketanya teaches you an agadic teaching. The Torah says, "Bonim atem lashem lekechem." Now, really, if you look at this language, sons you are to God. Now, the Torah should have written, "Atem bonim lashem lekechem." You are sons to God. So, therefore, Rabbi Yehuda has a very strict understanding. Bisman she'atem noyeg mina bonim. Whenever the Jews are behaving right, atem kriyim bonim, then you're called sons. Eino atem noyeg mina bonim. If you're not behaving rightly, like sons behave. They're not called sons, Rabbi Yehuda. So there is no favoritism for the Jews if they're not behaving correctly. Only if they act like sons, then God treats them like sons. Rav Meir has a very light opinion. No matter what the Jew is, atem kriyim banim, you're called a son. Doesn't matter. Shnema, the Torah says, banim secholim hema, banim v'oimer banim le'eimim ban, v'oimer zera mereyim banim ashchisim, v'oimer bar mokom asher yomer lehem le'ami atem, yomer lehem banai kelchai. Rav Meir just brought 4 psukim that seems to indicate that no matter how the Jew sins, he's automatically considered the son of God. He's never going to lose that title of being a son of God. So the Gemara is now going to discuss why Rav Meir had to bring 4 psukim to show that no matter what happens, we're still the son of God. And that's just a lesson in life, that a job of a parent is to love your children no matter what and whatever if. And this is the way Hashem treats us, that no matter what and whatever if, he still considers us his son. Why did Rav Meir bring 4 psukim? Only when the Jews act foolishly, let's say they waste their time with promiscuous stuff, so then the Torah considers them children. But let's say they don't believe in God. Let's say they're liberalism and they're atheists. Maybe then that Jew is not called a son. Tashma, the pasuk says, "Banim," you're still called son, even even if you don't believe in God, you're still called the son of God. That's how powerful the Jew is. If you want to say if you don't believe in God, you're still called a son. But once you start bowing down to avodah zarah, and let's call that drugs. When you destroy yourself, you destroy your soul. Maybe then the Jew is not called a son. Tashma v'zera mereyim banim ashchisim. Even if my children messed up, they're called sons that destroy themselves, but they're still called sons. If you want to say banim ashchisim, we're called destructive sons. B'nei mali aloi mikri, but we're not called special sons. We're called destructive kids. Tashma, the pasuk says, once a Jew does tshuva, that's why Rav Meir brought this 4th pasuk. When people will tell you, "Oh, you're not my nation," you tell them back just the opposite. We're the son of the Almighty God, the source of all living things. So Rav Meir brought a couple of psukim to prove that no matter how deep the Jew sunk, he's still considered a son of God. And that's what we learned from the pasuk Banim Atem Lashem Lekechem. New Mishnah. Okay, here the Mishnah is going to discuss again things that only apply by men and not by women. Hasmichas, putting your hands on the animal. Ba'tenufos, lifting the certain avodah called lifting, waving, and then if that applies by men and not by a woman. So if a woman brings a kohen, she doesn't do smicha, and if she has if she brings a shlamim, she doesn't do the waving. Now, if she was a kehenes, v'hagoshes, v'hakmitzes, v'haktares, v'hamalikas, v'hakabalas, v'hazoyes, all these services that are supposed to be done in the Beis Hamikdash, the hagim ba'anoshim only apply by men kohen, the loy b'anoshim not by women kohen. Now, chutz, there's an exception over here. A mincha saita, if a woman brings a saita, if she's a saita and she's bringing that mincha, or nazira, or she's a nazir and she's finishing her nazira, so there's a part of the procedure where she waves something. Shehei Manifas, they're involved in that waving. So now the Gemara just brings psukim. Smichas, how do you know Sticking your hand on the animal applies by men and not by women who bring a carbon. B'nei Yisrael Saimchin. Only boys are Saimchim. They ain't B'nai Yisrael Saimchim. And girls don't do smicha. Tenufos means waving. Dabel B'nai Yisrael, the Hainiv. B'nai Yisrael Menifim. B'nai Yisrael Menifas. So any carbon that a woman brings, she doesn't do the waving. Hagoshes applies by a mincha, which the kohen just takes the mincha basket and touches it to the mizbeach. So now, how do you know only that service is done by a kohen, but not by a kehenes? The Beis Hamikdash is only for the men kohen and not for the lady kohens. Gemitzois means doing the part of the service of the mincha where you stick your hands into the flour. The ksiv, the Havia el b'nei Aharon v'kometz. B'nei Aharon v'loi b'nei Aharon. Only the sons of Aharon do the kmitza, not the daughters. Haktares, the ksiv, v'kirois b'nei Aharon v'loi b'nei Aharon. Throwing things on the mizbeach apply to the sons of Aharon and not to the daughters. Hamalikais, malika is, if you remember, to cut the bird's neck, which is an avoida of when someone brings a carbon for a bird, so the kohen sticks his nail into the back of the neck. So the ksiv umalak v'hikter iskish melika l'haktara, just like haktara makter something on the mizbeach was only for the men kohen, so also the melika was only for the men kohen. Again, the women have no place in the Beis Hamikdash. Hakabolos, catching the blood. The ksiv v'ikrivu b'nei Aharon v'amamar. We learned. We go to Amud Beis v'ikrivu zu kabalos adam. The catching of the blood, of course, the zrika of the animal. And halacha and the zrika of the animal of the blood on the mizbeach only applies by men, kohen, and not by women. The hazois and sprinkling, hazoi dehecha. Who's sprinkling what? It applies by a man. The para, the sprinkling of the paraduma. Let's say they shechted the paraduma on Har Zeisim. Who does the sprinkling towards the Beis Hamikdash? Well, of course, it's not a kohenes. It's not a lady. A lozak siv. It has to be done by the kohen gadol. That's what the Chumash says in Parshas Chukas. If it's a carbon that only a kohen gadol goes into the base, into the heichal and sprinkles onto the curtain, well, that pasuk says a kohen Mashiach ksiv. That pasuk is, of course, it's obvious. It's the kohen that was anointed as the kohen. He's the one that brings that carbon. Elazar the ben oif, the asibik kal v'choyim ben saim. The sprinkling of the blood of a bird, right, that you put on the mizbeach, we learn from a kal v'choyma of a sheep. Ma ben saim shloi kava loy koyin l'shchitase. A sheep, any animal that you bring a carbon, anybody could be a shechter. Even a woman could be shechting, you know that? And any Yisrael could shecht in the Beis Hamikdash. But nevertheless, once it's shechted, from then on, it's the job of the kohen. Only a kohen can do the sprinkling of a regular animal. Ben oif by a bird. Only the kohen could actually do malika, slaughter the bird with his nail. Only that could be done by a kohen. Only the hazah can be done by the kohen. One last piece, and then we'll stop. One half a minute here. Chutz meminchas soita nazira. The waving of a soita and a nazir. If a woman is a soita or a nazira, she actually goes and waves it, the animal and the part of the mincha. Amar Rab Lozer Rab Yoshia Didari. Loi tesev akarach ad amali hashmaitzi. Rab Lozer said to Rab Yoshia, this Rabbi Yoshia lived in his generation. He says, don't sit down until you explain me this following teaching. How do I know that a soita mincha has to be waved? You know, the barley. How do you know that basket has to be waved? That he should wave the mincha. So the question is, yes, I know it has to be waved, but maybe the kohen does the waving. Al trufa b'malam and nolan. How do you know the woman participates in the waving? Asi yad mishlamin. So the gzeir yad mishlamin. Ksiv hasa lokach hachoyim yad isha. It says by the soita that you take it from the hands of the woman. Ksiv hasam yodav to the end. By shlamim, the bailim does the waving. Ma kan kohen. Just like by the soita is the kohen, af lahal and kohen. So also by the shlamim, the kohen does the waving. And just like by the shlamim, the owner does the waving of kambalim, so also by the soita, the Saita, the owner, which is the Saita lady, does the waving. So basically, the Chumash tells you that two people are supposed to wave this object. By Shlomim, it's the owner and the Kohen, and by the Saita, it's the lady and the Kohen. How could two people wave the same item? Okay, tzad, this is how you do it. Kohen machnas yodei tachas yad bailam. The Kohen will put his hands under her hands. Remember, he has to touch her hands. And then umenif, together they lift it. Ashkechon soita, that applies by a soita. Nazir menolan, how do you know that the Nazir also has a din of waving? Asi kaf kaf misoita, there's a gzer shava kaf. Here it says v'nosan al kapel, and by Nazir it also says v'nosan al kape Nazir. So we have a gzer shava, whatever applies by soita, that both the kohen and the woman do the waving. So it also applies if she was a Nazir. Okay. Here we start. Okay. A lot of information.